Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated.
Today we're going to be diving into something you're probably seeing all the time. Brands using slang in their marketing. Whether it's on social media or in those ads you skip through. It seems like every company's trying to sound like they belong on TikTok.
Right.
But does it actually work? Does using slang actually help brands connect with you? Or does it just come off as, cringy?
Yeah.
We're going to unpack all that today with this fascinating research paper by Pyrah and his colleagues.
Okay.
It's called The Slang Paradox.
Catchy.
Right. And it was published in the Journal of Marketing Research.
Nice.
So get ready to learn whether slang helps or hurts brands, and maybe even discover a few surprising things along the way.
Well, what's really interesting here is that almost 20% of brands' social media posts actually contain some form of slang.
Wow.
That's a pretty significant number when you think about it.
That's a lot. And I'm not surprised. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm constantly seeing brands trying to use the latest slang, whether it's Riz or Slay or whatever the word of the day is.
Yeah. Well, and that's a perfect example of what we're exploring here, the slang paradox.
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive for brands, which are ultimately businesses focused on profit, to be using language that's so informal and potentially alienating.
Yeah, because wouldn't you want to try to appeal to as many people as possible, not just a specific group who understands a particular slang term?
Exactly. But before we go any further, maybe we should take a step back and answer a basic question.
Okay.
What even is slang? It's more than just throwing in a curse word every now and then.
That's true. Like, if your doctor suddenly started talking about yeeting their stethoscope,
Yeah.
you'd probably be a little concerned,
Oh,
right?
sure.
There's a certain level of professionalism we expect.
Right.
And that goes for brands, too.
Yeah.
So what makes slang different from just using informal language?
Slang has a few key characteristics that set it apart. First, it's inherently informal.
Okay.
Think casual, relaxed, break in those standard grammar rules.
Right.
It's all about creating a very specific vibe.
So, like, we all say, what's up, instead of, how do you do?
Exactly.
It's just less formal and more relaxed.
Right. Second, slang usually has a specific meaning that goes beyond the literal definition of the word.
Okay.
It's about conveying a particular idea or feeling.
Okay.
Take Riz, for example.
Ah, yes, Riz. Someone who's got Riz is smooth and charming.
Oh, exactly.
It's not just a random word. It has a very specific meaning within a certain group.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third characteristic of slang.
Okay.
It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
What's cool today might be totally cringeworthy tomorrow.
Oh, for sure.
It's like a revolving door of words and phrases.
Which makes it even riskier for brands, right?
That's right.
Because by the time they figure out a slang term and how to use it, it might already be outdated.
Exactly. And finally, slang is all about connecting with a particular group or trend. It's about fitting in with a certain social circle.
So slang is informal.
Yes,
It has its own unique meanings. It's constantly changing.
Right.
And it's very social.
exactly.
But that brings us back to the big question.
Okay.
Why are brands risking it? Why would they use something so informal when they need to appeal to a wide audience?
Right.
You mentioned that research suggests it actually backfires more often than not.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Well, it comes down to two really crucial factors: consumer expectations and this idea of authenticity.
Okay.
Remember, you said it yourself, if your doctor started using slang, it would feel off.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be questioning their credentials for sure.
Right. Because consumers have certain expectations of brands. They see them as businesses, and they expect a level of professionalism in how those businesses communicate.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's an unspoken agreement that brands are driven by profit, not genuine social connections.
So when a brand tries to use slang, it clashes with that expectation.
Exactly.
And it comes off as inauthentic.
Exactly. It's like they're trying too hard to be something they're not. And consumers are savvy. They can spot that from a mile away.
Totally.
And you know what? That perceived lack of authenticity can actually hurt how people feel about the brand.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just that slang is informal, it's that it clashes with our fundamental understanding of how brands should communicate.
Exactly.
It makes me think, are there any brands that can successfully use slang? Or is it a lost cause altogether?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The research actually found that slang can work,
Okay.
but only under certain very specific conditions.
Interesting.
And it all comes down to two key factors: the brand's personality and who's actually doing the talking.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. So tell me, what kind of brand personality can pull off using slang?
Well, it's not just about being sincere or not.
Right.
It's more about whether using slang aligns with the brand's existing personality.
Okay.
For example, the research found that brands with a more exciting personality can actually benefit from using slang.
Okay, so what exactly do you mean by an exciting brand?
Think daring, trendy, edgy, maybe even a little rebellious.
Okay.
Like Monster Energy is a good example.
Yeah.
Their whole brand identity is built on pushing boundaries and being unconventional, so using slang actually fits their image.
It's like they're already speaking the language of their target audience.
Exactly.
So using slang just amplifies that.
Right. And the study actually compared Twitter engagement for Monster Energy and Arizona Iced Tea.
Okay.
Arizona Iced Tea, on the other hand, has a very different brand personality. Very wholesome and family-oriented.
So they're the sincere brand that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, right.
Where slang would feel totally out of place.
Exactly. And the research showed just that
Wow.
while slang boosted engagement for Monster's tweets, it actually hurt engagement for Arizona's. It just didn't fit their brand image.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference. It really highlights how important it is for brands to know themselves and their audience.
Definitely.
You can't just throw slang around and hope for the best.
Right.
So, exciting brands might be able to pull it off, but what about this second factor, who's doing the talking?
Yeah.
Why does that matter?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
When the brand itself tries to use slang, it can come across as very forced and inauthentic.
Yeah.
Almost like that awkward moment when a teacher tries to use slang to be cool.
Oh, yeah.
It just makes everyone uncomfortable.
Ugh. Yes, I can totally picture that. It's just cringe.
But when influencers use slang while promoting a brand, it's a completely different story because consumers see influencers as individuals, not as faceless corporations.
Right.
So their slang feels more natural and less like a calculated market employ.
So it's all about that authenticity again.
Exactly.
Because influencers are seen as genuine consumers themselves, their slang doesn't trigger those same alarm bells.
Exactly. The study actually looked at Peloton, a brand that's generally seen as exciting.
Right.
They found a huge difference in engagement depending on who is using the slang. When influencers use slang in Peloton-related posts, they got way more likes and retweets compared to when the official Peloton account used the same slang.
So basically, influencers can be a brand's secret weapon when it comes to using slang effectively.
Exactly.
They can bridge that authenticity gap and make the slang feel more organic and less like a marketing gimmick.
Precisely. It's a much safer bet for brands who are hesitant to use slang themselves.
This is fascinating stuff. We've learned that while brands want to use slang to connect with consumers, it often backfires because of those pesky consumer expectations and the importance of authenticity.
Right.
But it's not a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
Exciting brands might be able to pull it off, and influencers can definitely help.
Yeah.
This slang paradox is trickier than I thought.
It is.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
All this research is focused on mainstream slang, the kind that's pretty widely understood, at least among a certain age group.
Right.
But what about niche slang? The kind that's specific to smaller communities, online gamers, anime fans, or even podcast listeners.
That's a fantastic point. And it brings a whole new dimension to the slang paradox.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, niche slang is even more exclusive than mainstream slang.
Right.
If you're not part of that specific community, you might not even understand what they're saying.
Right. Like if a brand tried to use gamer slang to market to, say, grandmas who love to knit,
Yeah,
it would probably fall flat.
exactly. But on the other hand, if a brand can use niche slang correctly,
Yeah.
it could be a really powerful way to demonstrate a deep understanding of a specific audience.
Yeah.
It could show that they're not just trying to appeal to everyone,
Right.
but that they really get this particular group and how they communicate.
That's like a secret handshake almost.
Yes.
If a brand can use niche slang authentically,
Right.
it could build a really strong sense of connection and trust with that community.
Exactly.
And that could lead to much stronger brand loyalty and even advocacy within that niche.
Right. And it all comes back to authenticity.
Yeah.
When a brand uses niche slang correctly, it suggests they've done their research and aren't just throwing around buzzwords to seem cool.
Right.
They're invested in understanding and engaging with this community on their terms. It's about moving beyond superficial trends and demonstrating real cultural awareness.
Which is something that consumers, especially younger generations, are increasingly looking for in the brands they support.
Absolutely.
They want to feel like the brands they choose align with their values and understand their world.
I completely agree. And honestly, I think this idea of niche slang is a really promising area for future research and marketing.
Yeah.
There's so much to explore in terms of how brands can use it effectively and ethically.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that language is constantly evolving.
Yes.
And brands need to keep up if they want to stay relevant and connect with consumers in a meaningful way.
Right.
But that's a conversation for another time. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into slang and marketing. We've defined slang, explored the paradox of using it in marketing.
Right.
Talked about the importance of brand personality and the power of influencers. And even touched on the intriguing world of niche slang.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
It was a lot, but it was good.
It was good.
I'm ready for more.
Me too.
I think we got more to unpack here.
We do.
All right. Well, we'll be back in a bit to finish up.
Sounds good. Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how something as seemingly simple as slang can reveal so much about the complex relationship between brands and consumers.
Right.
And as you pointed out, this whole idea of niche slang adds yet another layer to that complexity.
Totally. It's like, on the one hand, brands are trying to reach as many people as possible.
Right.
But on the other hand, using slang, especially niche slang, is inherently about connecting with a very specific group, which by definition means excluding others.
It's almost like this paradox within a paradox, right?
Yes.
Brands wanted to be inclusive by using language that's inherently exclusive. Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important for brands to be really thoughtful and intentional about their use of slang. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay.
If a brand tries to use slang that resonates with everyone,
Yeah.
they risk ended up resonating with no one.
Right.
It just becomes generic and loses its authenticity.
You're absolutely right. It really boils down to understanding your audience.
Yeah.
Who are you trying to reach?
Right.
What language do they actually use? What are their values and interests?
Because ultimately, the most effective marketing is about speaking the same language as your audience, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot where your brand's message aligns with their interests and aspirations.
I couldn't agree more. And sometimes that might actually mean using slang.
Right.
But it needs to be done strategically and authentically.
For sure.
It's not just about chasing trends or trying to sound cool.
And you know, as we've been talking about this, I keep thinking back to those examples from the research paper. Like McDonald's trying to use Riz to sell burgers.
Right.
Or KFC saying their chicken is fire.
Yeah.
Did those campaigns actually work?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
Unfortunately, the research paper doesn't dive into the specific outcomes of those individual campaigns.
Okay.
But what it does give us is a framework for understanding the potential risks and rewards of using slang in marketing.
Right. And that framework basically tells us that it depends on a whole bunch of factors. The brand's personality.
Right.
The type of slang they're using.
Yeah.
Who's delivering the message. And of course, who they're trying to reach.
Precisely. It's not as simple as just sprinkling in a few slang words and hoping for the best.
Right.
Brands really need to do their homework and think critically about whether using slang aligns with their overall marketing strategy.
So for all the marketing folks out there listening,
Yeah.
what's the one key takeaway you would give them when it comes to using slang? What's the most important thing to keep in mind?
I think the biggest takeaway is simply to proceed with caution
Okay.
and a healthy dose of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Before you jump on the slang bandwagon,
Right.
ask yourself, what are we trying to achieve by using slang? Does it align with our brand personality and values?
Yeah.
Are we confident we can use it authentically without sounding forced or out of touch?
Right.
And maybe most importantly, are we using it to genuinely connect with a specific audience, or are we just trying to be trendy?
Those are great questions.
Right.
It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to take a step back
Yeah.
and really think about whether it makes sense for your brand.
Right.
And honestly, even if you think you can pull it off,
Yeah.
it might be worth considering letting influencers take the lead.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Influencers can be such valuable assets when it comes to navigating the tricky world of slang. They already have that credibility and authenticity within their communities.
Right.
And they can help brands avoid those cringeworthy moments that we were talking about earlier.
Right. They can act as a kind of buffer,
Exactly.
ensuring the slang feels organic and relatable
Yeah.
rather than forced and awkward.
Uh-huh.
It's like having a friend who speaks the language fluently. It can help you navigate those tricky cultural nuances.
Exactly. They can be your slang whisperers, so to speak.
Love that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the potential pitfalls of using slang.
Right.
But is there ever a time when it's actually a good idea for a brand to use slang? When can it actually work in their favor?
You know, I think there are times when it can be very effective.
Okay.
One example that comes to mind is when a brand is trying to build a sense of community or belonging around a specific shared interest.
So it's not about trying to reach everyone, but rather about strengthening those connections with a smaller, more dedicated group.
Exactly. Think about brands that cater to very specific niches like gaming or skateboarding or even a particular musical genre. Using slang that's common within those communities can be a really powerful way to create a sense of shared identity and belonging.
It's like you're speaking their language,
Right.
both literally and metaphorically.
Exactly.
You're showing that you understand their world and that you're part of their tribe.
Right. And it can also be a way for brands to tap into a sense of nostalgia or shared cultural history.
Oh, interesting.
Think about brands that have been around for a while and have a strong heritage.
Okay.
They can use slang from a particular era to evoke a sense of familiarity and connection with their longtime customers.
Ooh, that's interesting. It's like they're saying, we've been here with you through it all, and we understand where you're coming from.
Exactly. It's a way of leveraging that shared history to build a stronger emotional bond with their audience.
Okay.
But again, it needs to be done authentically and respectfully.
Right.
If it feels forced or inauthentic, it'll backfire.
Totally. It's like walking a tightrope one misstep, and you risk falling into the inauthenticity abyss.
That's a great way to put it. So to sum it all up, using slang in marketing can be a very powerful tool,
Yeah.
but it's not for the faint of heart.
Right.
Brands need to be smart, strategic, and above all, authentic in their approach.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I think we've thoroughly dissected the slang paradox
We have.
and explored all the nuances of using slang in marketing.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up completely, I have one final question for you.
Okay, I'm all ears.
We've talked a lot about brands using slang to connect with consumers. But what about the other side of the equation?
Yeah.
How do consumers feel about brands using slang? Do they actually appreciate it?
Right.
Or does it make them roll their eyes?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think the answer is it depends.
Okay.
Just like with so many things in marketing, there's no single right answer.
Right.
It all comes down to understanding your target audience and their specific preferences.
So it's all about knowing your audience, right?
Exactly. Some consumers, especially younger generations who are more fluent in internet culture and trends,
Right.
might actually appreciate brands using slang.
Okay.
It can make the brand feel more relatable and less corporate.
Like they're in on the joke, so to speak.
Right. It can create a sense of shared understanding and humor. But for other consumers, especially those who are less familiar with slang or who value a more traditional approach,
Yeah.
it can be a real turnoff.
So if a brand isn't careful, they could end up alienating a significant portion of their potential audience.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to do your research and understand the demographics and psychographics of your target market.
It's not about trying to appeal to everyone.
Right.
It's about crafting your message to resonate with the specific people you're trying to reach.
Exactly. And, you know, this actually brings up another interesting point.
Okay.
Even within a specific target audience,
Yeah.
There can be a lot of variation in terms of how people feel about brands using slang.
Oh, that makes sense. Not everyone within a particular group is going to feel the same way.
Right.
So how can brands navigate that complexity?
Well, I think the key is to be aware of the potential for backlash.
Okay.
And to use slang sparingly and strategically. Don't overdo it.
Less is more. Right.
Exactly. And also be mindful of the specific slang terms you're using.
Yeah.
Some terms might be more widely accepted than others.
It's about striking that balance between sounding trendy and authentic without crossing the line into cringeworthy territory.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And honestly, the best way to gauge how your audience feels about slang is to simply ask them. Use surveys, focus groups, social media polls, whatever methods you have at your disposal to get their feedback.
That's a great point. It's about having that open dialogue with your audience and really listening to their input.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's the consumers who will ultimately decide whether your use of slang is a hit or miss.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into slang in marketing.
It's been a really interesting conversation.
It has been.
We've covered so much ground today.
Yeah.
From defining slang to exploring the paradox of using it in marketing.
Right.
And even diving into the complexities of consumer perceptions.
And as we've been talking, I realized there's one more aspect of this slang paradox that we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
It's this idea that slang is constantly evolving.
Right.
What's considered slang today might be completely mainstream tomorrow.
Exactly.
And vice versa.
That's such a great point. Slang is like this living, breathing language that's always in flux. It's a reflection of culture, and culture is constantly changing.
Right. So for brands, that means they're always playing catch up.
Yeah.
They're trying to use slang to stay relevant and connect with younger audiences.
Right.
But the language itself is a moving target.
It's a real challenge.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why authenticity is so important.
Right.
If a brand tries to force it, it's going to be obvious. Consumers, especially younger consumers, have a finely tuned radar for inauthenticity.
They can smell it a mile away. It's like when you hear your parents trying to use slang that's clearly not part of their everyday vocabulary.
Oh, yeah.
It's just cringy.
Exactly. And it can actually do more harm than good for the brand.
Yeah.
It's better to be genuine and true to your brand's voice than to try to be something you're not.
So what's the takeaway here for brands? If slang is constantly evolving, how can they possibly keep up?
Well, I think the key is to focus on understanding the underlying cultural trends that drive language change.
Okay.
It's not about memorizing a list of slang terms.
Right.
It's about being aware of the shifts in values, attitudes, and behaviors that shape how people communicate.
So it's less about chasing trends and more about understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's where having a diverse team of marketers can be really valuable.
Right.
People who come from different backgrounds and have different life experiences can bring a wider range of perspectives and insights to the table.
It's about having that cultural fluency within your team.
Yes.
So that you can better understand and connect with the nuances of different audiences.
Absolutely. And it's also about being willing to learn and adapt.
Right.
The marketing landscape is constantly changing, and slang is just one small part of that.
Right.
Brands need to be flexible and open to new ideas if they want to stay ahead of the curve.
That's such great advice.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the challenges and potential pitfalls of using slang in marketing.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
Niche slang.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a real opportunity for brands to connect with specific communities by using slang that's unique to those groups.
Right.
But it's also a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
How can brands use niche slang effectively and authentically without crossing the line into appropriation or exploitation?
That's such an important question, and I think the answer lies in approaching niche communities with respect, humility, and a genuine desire to learn and understand their culture. It's not about using slang as a marketing gimmick.
Right.
It's about building authentic relationships and demonstrating that you value their perspectives and experiences.
So it's about more than just using the right words. It's about understanding the context.
Yes.
The history.
Right.
And the significance of those words within that community.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to listen and learn from the community itself.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right.
Seek feedback.
Okay.
and collaborate with members of the community to ensure that your use of slang is both appropriate and respectful.
It's about building those genuine connections and showing that you're not just trying to exploit their culture for profit.
Precisely. And, I think one of the best ways to do that is to support and amplify the voices of creators and influencers who are already part of that community.
Right.
They're the ones who truly understand the nuances of the language and can help bridge the gap between brands and consumers.
It's about empowering those voices and giving them a platform to share their perspectives and experiences.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that language is more than just words.
Yeah,
It's a reflection of identity, culture, and community.
well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into slang and marketing,
Yeah.
what's the one key takeaway you would leave our listeners with? What's the most important thing for them to remember?
If I had to distill it down to one key takeaway,
Okay.
it would be this. Slang can be a powerful tool for connection, but it's a double-edged sword. Use it wisely,
Okay.
use it authentically,
Right.
and above all, use it respectfully.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about being mindful of the power of language and using it in a way that builds bridges rather than burns them.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, folks, that concludes our deep dive into the fascinating world of slang and marketing.
It was a good one.
It was a good one.
Yes.
We hope you've learned a thing or two about the slang paradox,
Right.
the importance of authenticity, and the power of language to connect with consumers.
For sure.
And maybe the next time you see a brand trying to slay with their marketing,
Yeah.
you'll have a deeper understanding of the complexities of play.
You will.
Exactly. Remember, language is constantly evolving, so stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay authentic.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.